All right. Today we are talking about Aristotelian Essentialism, its origins as originally written by Aristotle, kind of what he originally meant, and then how it applies in a more holistic modern philosophical sense.
Okay, so first some background into Aristotle's philosophy. One of the most important points to take away from his virtue ethics is his idea of a final cause. Aristotle believed that all living things are evolving toward an end, which he called a telos. The final cause of a living being depends on its primary function. So, since humans are rational animals, according to Aristotle, our telos is the final cause of rational action, which he believed was ultimate virtue. And when human beings practice reason well, they will ultimately lead a virtuous life, which will cause their souls to flourish, leading to eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is happiness, but Aristotle meant it in a more holistic way than the simple English translation of the word. He meant it more as spiritual fulfillment rather than just fleeting pleasure or enjoyment. For a human being, this sense of eudaimonia comes from the application of their function, reasoning, done well and consistently. Reason will lead naturally to virtuous actions, and the practice of virtue will therefore allow the soul to flourish. But other creatures, since they cannot reason, have to use their primary function well to lead to eudaimonia. Our example that we gave, which is directly from Aristotle, is an acorn growing into an oak tree and spreading more acorns, and therefore experiencing immortality, is experiencing eudaimonia.
So we touched on this a little bit with humans placed as rational animals, but Aristotle uses the term essentialism, and it becomes very important in the political discussion we'll have later. But essential in this context basically just means something at the core of the very definition of a thing, such that changing that essential aspect would necessarily change the very nature of the thing in discussion, so that it would no longer be capable of being what it was before. So Aristotle says that that's our capacity to reason as human beings, but our example is that in a similar way, the ability to metabolize and create energy is essential to all living animals. So, in the same way that a living animal would die, if it couldn't metabolize, human beings couldn't possibly be human beings if they didn't have their capacity to reason. So, kind of an extension of that thought is that as long as you don't change an essential element of something, it will still be what it is. So, as long as you don't change a human being's capacity to reason, then it is still a human being. Um, and Aristotle says this directly in a general sense in Nicomachean Ethics, where he says, further, in the case of things provided to us by nature, we first receive the capacities for them and later exhibit the activities. So he's saying that everything is kind of created with an essential set of values that, or not values, but an essential set of characteristics that can then be used over time. So even when a person is denied the opportunity to fully develop, they're still human because of their capacity to reason. Similarly, a plant in the dark would not be able to grow in the dark, but once it's moved into the light, it could grow and be a normal plant again. So it never lost the essence of being a plant. It was just kept from growing because of its situation. And similarly, a sharp, large rock corroded by water, to be smooth and smaller is still a rock, even if it's smaller or smoother than before. So the essential characteristics of something can be retained even though other parts change.
All right, and essentialism has a lot of implications in morality. For Aristotle, being a good or moral human being relies on performing our function well. He says this kind of directly in the Nicomachean Ethics when he says, for whatever has some function in action, the good, the doing well, seems to lie in the function. The same also holds of a human being. Therefore, we need to understand the essence of what it means to be human in order to understand our primary function and then become moral beings. Once we accept reason as our essential aspect, according to Aristotle, we know to use reason well in order to reach our telos, or eudaimonia. Reason will lead us to virtuous action, and then virtue will allow our souls to flourish, entering eudaimonia.
So now that we've talked about Aristotle's meanings and definitions, it's time to move on to a more modern sense. So Martha Nussbaum, in her essay, writes a defense of Aristotelian essentialism against modern demands for relativism as an account for moral righteousness. So she's defending these essentialist ideas as an account of basic human needs. She says that they're necessary for compassion and respect, and by extension, the creation and maintenance of a fair legal system. And she thinks that relativism is just not a fair way for any sort of power to maintain a fair system.
All right, so Nussbaum's 10 basic human functional capabilities that she believes should be the goals that we try to reach for universal humanity are as follows. First, she believes that people shouldn't die prematurely. They should get to live a long and fruitful life. And kind of a subsect of that is she thinks they should be in good health. They should be able to live fully without being sick and crippled. They should be able to feel pleasure and avoid pain. And they should have cognitive development. They should be able to perceive with all five senses. They should be able to imagine and think and reason, just like Aristotle thought. They should also be able to use practical reason in the sense that they should be able to choose for themselves what they value and what they want their life purpose and goals to be. They should have affiliation with other human beings. They should be able to form attachments, meaning they should be able to love and grieve and feel for the people around them. They should also have compassion for the people around them. They should be able to show concern for the pain of the people that they associate with, and they should be able to properly socialize. They should also have the capacity for humor and play and be able to enjoy recreation and have that free time. They should have compassion for nature and the plants and animals around them and in their environment. And finally, they should be able to have a separate individual life where they get to choose for themselves the environment and the things that they want to engage in.
So these 10 kind of capacities of humanness are very essentialist in thinking because they're attempting to outline the characteristics of universal human experience that are necessary for development. So Nussbaum is trying to bring together things that are at the very core of humanness, just like Aristotle was trying to use reason as the final cause of humanity, and she does it in different words, but recognizes herself as essentialist and is saying that without kind of recognizing these 10 characteristics or some other such system, it's impossible to be able to create a fair system. So she's saying that the capabilities that she is giving provide a path for universal humanity to flourish and to completely develop human beings, and that should be used to outline a policy that ideally at least would create a path towards our telos eudaimonia. If you're talking in an Aristotelian context, you can kind of bring the two together and say that.
And finally, Nussbaum's ideas have several implications for how we think about public policy and welfare. First of all, we should bear in mind, after examining these 10 capabilities, that when implementing this list into public policy, we must do so with regard to context, history, and culture. Different groups of people have different needs for reaching the basic capabilities, and that's entirely dependent on the social context that they're living in. One example that we have is when you're promoting the separateness ideal that Nussbaum talks about, you should note the different emphasis different societies place on individuality, which is more of a Western idea, versus collectivism in the East, and how different societies will value the relative strength of separatism differently. And also we have another example that Nussbaum kind of talks about in her article, that for women in Bangladesh, the recognition of every individual as human and worthy of these 10 basic capabilities was crucial in getting them to want to increase their literacy and engage in the practical reasoning and cognitive development ideal. So the importance of we should take away from this that there's an importance of giving opportunities rather than forcing certain choices on people and societies. And then for a further point, this list kind of shows us why GDP is not an accurate measure of wealth and to see how well a nation's people are doing. GDP only accounts for aggregate wealth, and it doesn't include things like the distribution of wealth or the fulfillment of essential markers of wealth and well-being, such as average education or income per capita and stuff like that. This list Nussbaum articulated would cover. So the fulfillment of the 10 basic capabilities is necessary for fostering an environment for people to develop and flourish, which is entirely separate from GDP.
And we hope that we've given a good account of Aristotle and Nussbaum and provided some light about how they're connected.